Welcome back to the Empress and her general, where glances linger too long and hearts keep fighting battles neither woman can win. Before we begin, subscribe and join us on this slow-burning journey because trust me, things are only getting more complicated. And while you're here, let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled. She had been wrong. Not about the competence. Not about the command decisions, the loyalty of the division, the particular economy of language in the tactical reports that she had read so many times the phrasing had settled into memory like verse. Not about the bearing she had correctly anticipated, or the quality of attention that encompassed a room without appearing to, or the refusal of 6 consecutive medal ceremonies that she had found, privately and without any rational justification, the most compelling thing she had ever read about a person she had never met. All of that she had read correctly. She had simply, and this was the part she was finding it very difficult to sit with, attached it to the wrong body, the wrong pronoun, for 8 years. Because the dispatches did not specify, and she had not thought to ask, and generals were men and men were generals, and no one had told her otherwise, because no one had imagined she needed to be told. She was lying on her bed in the pale gold morning of her second day back, staring at the ceiling, fully dressed, having woken at the 4th hour and been unable to go back to sleep. And she was thinking about this with the focused, unflinching attention she applied to things she would rather not look at but had decided to look at anyway, because the alternative was looking at the ceiling forever, and she had things to do. From the corridor, Hong Xiuwen's footsteps. The door opened. "Your Highness is awake early." A pause. Hong Xiuwen had a gift for pauses. She could fill them with more unspoken opinion than most people managed in full sentences. This one said, "I see that we are lying on the bed fully dressed at the 4th hour. I have noted this. I will not be remarking upon it." She set the tea tray down. The cups made their small celadon sound. "I owe Teacher Maywen a letter," Zhaoyue said to the ceiling. "You do. She will ask how the return is going." "She will. I am not certain what I will tell her." Hong Xiuwen poured the tea. The sound of it was very ordinary and very grounding. "The princess might tell her that the court is as the court is, that the emperor is well, and that the northern tour departs in 6 weeks. That would be accurate." "It would. It would also be," Zhaoyue said carefully, "incomplete." A longer pause this time. Then, "Tea is ready, Your Highness." Zhaoyue sat up. She reached for the cup. It was warm in both hands and it smelled like the monastery blend. Teacher Maywen had pressed a full packet on Hong Xiuwen at parting, because she believed in practical kindness above every other kind, and the familiar smell was so exactly itself that something in Zhaoyue's chest did a complicated thing she chose not to examine. She drank the tea. She looked out the window at the pale gold morning over the inner garden. "Hong Xiuwen, Your Highness, in the 8 years, reading the dispatches, after I set them down." She kept her eyes on the window. "Did you also? Did the dispatches suggest to you that General Wei was?" A silence, the kind that has an answer inside it. "Yes," Hong Xiuwen said. Zhaoyue looked at her tea. "The dispatches do not specify," Hong Xiuwen added, gently. "Your Highness did not imagine something that was not suggested. You simply filled the silence with the most available answer. The wrong answer. The answer anyone would have given. A pause. And she is, I mean to say, she is still everything the dispatches described. Is she not?" Zhaoyue thought about the receiving line. The gold dragons on the black hanfu. The neatly pinned bun and the scarred hands, and the 2 seconds of eye contact that had carried no readable expression whatsoever, and both of them looking away at the same moment. "Yes," she said. "She is." She set down the cup. She stood. She smoothed the front of her hanfu, deep amber today, embroidered at the collar with small persimmon blossoms, the colors of a woman who had decided to be fully present in her mourning, and went to the dressing table, and said nothing more, and Hong Xiuwen said nothing more, and the matter was closed between them in the way that certain matters between people who know each other well are closed. Not resolved, but set aside, in a place both of them knew the location of. On the 4th morning, when Baoshian came to call, which she had been expecting, and brought a document, which she had been expecting, and sat across from her in the small eastern receiving room with the expression of a man doing a job he believed in, which she had also been expecting. Because Wen Baoshian was one of those people who were entirely legible once you understood the grammar of them. He was the grammar of 40 years at court. He was deep green silk robes and gold-brushed insignia, and a spine that had held the same angle through 3 imperial reigns. He was politeness as architecture, every word placed to bear precise weight, every silence a structural element. She had been reading men like him since her father first brought her into rooms where decisions were made, at the age of 10, and told her to listen. She had listened. She was still listening. He placed the document on the table. He did not push it toward her. She picked it up herself because she had not come home to wait for things to be handed to her. 3 names, 3 columns, 3 futures in the language of political inventory: age, lineage, temperament, land, connections, disposition. She read them with the same attention she gave to grain records, which was to say, total, unhurried, looking for the thing that the language was trying not to say. Lord Pei Yancheng, 41, polished smooth as river stone, the choice that required no justification and inspired no particular thought. Lord Tan Zhuo, 28, even-tempered, principled, regarded with genuine warmth. That entry. She had read it twice before she set the document down the first time. Genuine warmth was the hardest quality to argue against because there was no reasonable argument against it. It simply sat there and waited, and if you turned away from it, you were the one who had to explain why. Lord Sui Mingxian, 33, ambitious. She had already decided he was the one to watch. "I will consider them," she said. Wen Baoshian's inclination said everything it needed to say about reasonable timelines and imperial continuity. He had 40 years in that inclination. She acknowledged it with the slight forward tilt of a woman who had heard it, which was not the same as agreeing to it. "The Northern Tour," he said then. 6 weeks. General Wei Yanling confirmed as escort and protection commander. "I know." Something shifted in his eyes, brief, controlled. The adjustment of a man encountering a position he had prepared a sentence for and finding the sentence unnecessary. "The general is chief minister." She kept her voice pleasant, the pleasantness that held a door closed without appearing to. "I was introduced to the general at the ceremony. I have read 8 years of campaign dispatches. I am not in need of a briefing on who she is." A pause. "Of course, Your Highness. Is there anything else?" There was. She could see something else. There were several something elses. The court's opinion about the escort assignment. The particular conversation certain ministers had been having about the impropriety of an unmarried princess traveling with a female general whose reputation was built entirely on a world the court had not decided what to do with yet. She could see all of it in the careful arrangement of his expression, the way a map shows terrain without showing weather. He said none of it. He collected the document. She had set it back on the table, because she had not agreed to take it home, and rose and bowed and left, and the small receiving room settled back into its morning quiet, and Zhaoyue sat for a while in the amber silk with her hands in her lap and thought about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The northern provinces. Roads she had only ever read about. Towns that existed in her understanding as supply figures and administrative correspondence, and somewhere behind all of that, the actual towns, the actual roads, the actual people who had needed grain in winter and gotten it because someone had decided the official process could wait until the dying stopped. She stood. She smoothed her sleeves. She had government archives to find. The Imperial Library had a window she had not planned on. She had chosen the corner alcove for practical reasons. Northern wall, good light, far enough from the main reading tables that the ambient sound of scholars turning pages did not accumulate into the specific low-grade irritation that she found, after 8 years of monastery silence, difficult to read through. She had set up her notes and her cross-referenced records and her second cup of tea. Always a second cup. Hong Xiuwen had stopped raising an eyebrow about it before the end of the first week, and she had been reading the northern provinces' trade records and the correspondence between the border administrators and the Ministry of Revenue. And she had been doing this systematically and productively, and without distraction. The window had a view of the eastern training ground. She was not watching the training ground. She was aware of it, in the way one is aware of rain on a roof, peripheral, rhythmic, a condition of the environment. The drills began at the 5th hour, and she noted the time the way she noted the time when a bell rang, and then went back to the trade records, which were what she was here for and which were, genuinely, interesting. The northern silk routes had been disrupted twice in 3 years. The grain assessments showed a 4th quarter gap that did not match the supply manifests. The whole picture of the provincial economy was one of a region that had been surviving rather than thriving, and understanding why was directly relevant to the tour and to everything she would be expected to do when the throne was eventually hers. She turned a page. She made a note. She turned another page. Below the window, the formation shifted into sparring pairs. She looked up. She was not going to explain this to herself. It was a movement, and movement drew the eye. That was a simple fact of human attention and had nothing to do with anything. The pairs were working through a northern engagement pattern she recognized from the military theory texts. Adapted for cold climates, heavier layering, the technique rebuilt around the restrictions. And she watched them the way she had always watched anything she had read about and was now seeing for the first time, with the sharp, almost greedy attention of a person for whom reading and seeing had never quite been the same thing. At the far end of the courtyard, the general was running the correction circuit. She moved between the sparring pairs with the economy of someone whose body had long since filed all of this under automatic, adjusting a stance here, redirecting an arm there, 3 seconds per correction, and then moving on. She was in black, as she had been at the ceremony. The outer robe ink dark, the gold dragons at the border finding the pale morning light and holding it, the red underlayer a flicker at the collar when she turned. Her hair was in the bun, a little looser than it had been in the ceremonial hall, the looseness of early mornings and not tending to it, 1 or 2 strands come free and not attended to. The effect was not less precise for this. If anything, it was more so, the precision of a person who was precise in every way that mattered and had never learned to care about the rest. She was not looking at the library window. Zhaoyue was fairly sure she was not looking at the library window. The correction circuit ended. The general stopped at the weapons rack and lifted a practice sword and began to move through a personal form, not drill, not instruction, just a body given back to itself for a few minutes, working through something long and unhurried in the gold of the early morning. The black hanfu moved. The gold at the hem caught the light in a slow rhythm, found it, lost it, found it again. Zhaoyue realized she had been looking at the same line of the grain redistribution record for considerably longer than it warranted. She looked at the line, she read it, she made a note. She did not look up again. She was almost entirely successful for the rest of the morning. The trade records were genuinely interesting. The grain gap was a real problem that required real understanding. She had several productive thoughts about provincial governance and made 6 pages of notes, and identified 3 discrepancies between the official supply records and the border administrator's correspondence that suggested the numbers she had been given were not the numbers that had actually existed on the ground. She left the library at midday, having resolved to find the supplementary records. She did not think, as she descended the library stairs into the bright, ordinary noon of the palace, about the form and how long it had been. She did not think about the specific quality of someone who did a thing twice rather than stop. She was a future Empress reviewing government documents in preparation for a governance tour, and she was going to stay focused on that. Hong Xiuwen was waiting at the bottom of the stairs with a fresh cup of tea, and the expression of a woman who had been watching her watch something for the better part of 3 hours, and had formed opinions she was not going to share until asked. Zhaoyue took the tea. "Not a word," she said. "Your Highness," Hong Xiuwen said, which was not a word so much as a master class in saying everything by saying nothing, and fell into step behind her. The Ministry of War's Eastern Archive was not, technically, difficult to access. It was simply not the kind of place anyone went unless they had a specific reason, which was the archive's first line of defense, not locks and guards, but the simple discouragement of being unremarkable. 3 buildings past the Ministry of Revenue, through the administrative quarters' narrow, interconnecting corridors, past 2 sets of doors that required the correct seals, and one archivist named Fang, who had clearly not anticipated an imperial princess, appearing in his 3rd room this afternoon, and was managing the surprise with the stoic determination of a man who had decided that outward composure was the only available response to life's more extraordinary offerings. The supplementary records for the Northern Province redistribution, Zhaoyue said. 4th quarter, border garrison operations. Archivist Fang blinked once, led her to the correct room, lit the additional lanterns, gestured at the shelves, and retreated with the small, dignified speed of someone who had chosen wisely. Hong Xiuwen settled onto the bench by the door with her embroidery. She always brought embroidery. Zhaoyue had long suspected the embroidery was less a project and more a prop, something to hold so that it was not obvious you were holding your breath. But she had never asked, because some things were better left as the kindness they were. She found the file on the 2nd shelf. Brown cord. Exactly where she had heard it said, through a map room door she was not supposed to be lingering near, in 4 sentences to a cartographer who had needed half a page for the same information. She untied the cord. She sat down. She began to read. The records were nothing like she had expected. She had expected military paperwork, efficient, impersonal, the language of logistics and authorization chains. What she found was both of those things and also something else, something that was harder to name. The records of a person who had understood that the argument would need to be made in the facts, and had therefore refused to let the facts be imprecise. Every rerouted shipment documented. Every authorization noted. Every deviation from the official route explained, not in the cold, passive language of administration, but in the flat, specific language of someone who had been there and was describing what they had seen. Eastern road impassable, heavy snow, northern bypass added 2 days, but lost no cargo. Official route through Gangling Pass not recommended in temperatures below freezing after sustained snowfall. Then at the bottom of that entry a notation, see attached fatality record previous season. She found the attached fatality record. She turned to it, 12 carts, 11 drivers, 2 escort soldiers. Listed in the administrative shorthand of the Ministry of War, family name, given name, township of origin, date, small characters. The kind of entry that lived in a record nobody read and affected nobody's decisions after the fact, except that it had. It had been attached here to this file so that whoever was reading would understand precisely what the deviation from official protocol was deviating away from. She read every name. She did not do this because protocol required it. She did it because she was going to govern these provinces, and governing them meant knowing that the numbers were people, and knowing that the people had names, and knowing the names, all of them, even the ones that would not be remembered by anyone except the families who missed them, was the beginning of knowing what the job actually was. 11. She sat with that for a moment. The archive room was quiet around her, camphor and old ink, the candle doing its steady work. Hong Xiuwen's needle moved in the corner, the small sound of it entirely ordinary and entirely grounding. She turned the page. The redistribution records continued, meticulous, thorough, the handwriting throughout the same spare, quick hand with its forward lean. The characters of someone who wrote fast because there were always more things to write and time was finite, and the work was what mattered. She had been reading this handwriting for 2 hours before she recognized it as the same hand that had briefed the cartographer yesterday, and had been reading it for another hour before she admitted to herself that she had been recognizing it the whole time. "Your Highness," she looked up. The candle had burned down considerably further than she had accounted for. The light outside the archive's high window had shifted from the amber of late afternoon to the deep blue of early evening. "How long?" she said. 2.5 hours. Hong Xiuwen's voice was entirely neutral, give or take. Zhaoyue looked at the stack of records remaining. Another half hour. She read the half hour and then another quarter hour on top of it. And when she was done, she stacked the records exactly as she had found them and retied the brown cord and put the file back on the second shelf and stood in the middle of the archive room for a moment, just breathing. She was going to these provinces. She was going to see the Gangling Pass and the Eastern Road and the garrison towns where the grain had arrived 2 days late and not one driver had been lost. She was going to walk through all of it with the records in her head and the 11 names in whatever part of her was keeping them now. And she was going to do it with a general who had attached the fatality record to the file so that whoever read it later would understand what the numbers meant. "Done," she said. She picked up the walking lantern. She went home. They were in the inner garden, the long way back, the evening air mild enough to make the detour worth it, and the plum blossoms out in the pale extravagance of early spring, when Hong Xiuwen said, "She was here this afternoon." Zhaoyue kept walking. Who was? The general. The lantern swung with Hong Xiuwen's step, making the blossoms shift their shadows on the path. With her lieutenant, perimeter walk, she had a map of the palace grounds. She is learning the layout. Yes, she walks fast. A thoughtful pause. Her lieutenant walks fast too. I think he has learned to. Zhaoyue stopped, not because of the walking. She stopped because the phrasing had that particular quality. The quality of something offered as casual that had not been arrived at casually. And because Hong Xiuwen had been in the library for 3 hours this morning, and the embroidery shop was not near the inner garden. And when you put these things together, they described someone who had made it her business. She turned. Hong Xiuwen stood with her lantern and the embroidery bag over one arm and the expression of a woman who had prepared for exactly this turn in the conversation and was entirely at peace with it. "Hong Xiuwen," Zhaoyue said. "How long have you been watching her?" "Observing," Hong Xiuwen said. The distinction appeared important to her. "How long?" "Since the ceremony." She adjusted the embroidery bag. "Your Highness was processing certain information. I thought it useful to have information, in case it was needed." "That is," Zhaoyue said, "not what attendants do." "That is exactly what I do," Hong Xiuwen said, pleasantly and without apology. "I have done it for 8 years. I did it at the monastery too. There is very little Your Highness has undertaken that I have not quietly made it my business to understand." She paused. "I thought that was understood between us." It had always been. Zhaoyue pressed her mouth together against something that was not quite a smile and turned back to the path, and Hong Xiuwen fell back into step. "What did you observe?" Zhaoyue said, after a moment. "She is methodical." Hong Xiuwen's voice was thoughtful. She walked the full perimeter, not just the military quarter, all of it. The garden gates, the library wing, the northern administrative corridor. She noted the distances. "I think she measures things. A beat. Her lieutenant is the kind of man who finds this normal." "Lu Mingjai," Zhaoyue said. She knew the name from the dispatches. Second in command, 8 years. Perceptive, dry, deployed with precision. That was the portrait the officers' accounts drew of him. He does not say very much, but he watches her the way people watch things they find quietly extraordinary and have stopped expecting anyone else to notice. A pause. "I found that interesting." Zhaoyue found it interesting too. She said nothing. They reached the turning at the end of the garden path, where the stone walkway began and the lanterns of the inner palace flickered ahead of them in the early dark. And Hong Xiuwen said, and this was the thing she had been building to. Zhaoyue understood it as soon as she said it. She stopped at the eastern wall, looked up at the library wing for a moment. Then she said something to the lieutenant and they continued on. The eastern wall, where the library window was. Zhaoyue walked the rest of the path in silence, and Hong Xiuwen walked behind her in the same silence, and neither of them filled it. That night she wrote to Teacher Meiwen. She had been avoiding it since the first day, which was not like her. Correspondence was one of the disciplines she had developed early and maintained without reluctance, because Teacher Meiwen had taught her that the quality of your letters described the quality of your thinking, and she had always wanted her thinking to be demonstrably good. Avoiding the letter meant something. She was aware of what it meant. She was going to write it anyway. She sat at the lacquered writing desk in her night robe, soft gray silk, the kind that had no opinion about itself, with the ink freshly ground and the brush her favorite one, the one with the slightly worn tip that she had refused to replace because she wrote better with it, reasons unknown. The lamp was lit. The palace was quiet. Outside the lattice, the spring moon was making its careful argument for beauty. She wrote, "I am well. The court is as the court is." The emperor is in good health and clearly pleased with the return, though he has also clearly arranged several things in advance that he is presenting as natural developments, which is either statecraft or fatherhood, and possibly both. She wrote, "The northern tour departs in 6 weeks. I have been reviewing the provincial records, and they are considerably more interesting than I expected. I spent 2.5 hours in the Ministry of War's Eastern Archive this afternoon and did not notice the time passing, which has not happened to me in a government archive before." She held the brush. She wrote, "I have also been reading the trade records from the library alcove on the 3rd floor of the northern wing, which has a window overlooking the eastern training ground. The view is incidental." She looked at that sentence. She considered it. She crossed it out. She wrote, "There is an escort assigned for the tour. I believe the journey will be educational." She set down the brush. She read what she had written. Teacher Maywin would read it too, and would know, as she always knew, exactly which parts of the letter were the real ones, and would write back with something oblique and useful that did not quite say what it meant, and said it perfectly. She sealed the letter. She set it with the morning correspondence. Then she opened the journal, the 4th monastery journal, the gray cloth cover, the one that had General Wei Yanling written all through it, and which she had decided 4 days ago was closed. She turned to a new page. She picked up the brush. She wrote, "I have been wrong about one thing for 8 years. I was wrong in the way that happens when a silence is available and the most obvious thing steps in to fill it. I do not think I was wrong about anything else." A pause. She wrote. She stopped at the eastern wall. Beneath it, in the small characters she used for the things she was not ready to say at full size, "And I was at the window." She closed the journal. She put out the lamp. She lay in the dark with the spring moon making lattice shapes on the ceiling above her. And she thought about the archive and the 11 names, and the gangling pass in winter, and the handwriting with its forward lean that she had recognized before she admitted to herself. She had recognized it. She thought about 6 weeks. She thought, briefly, about the eastern wall. She was 23. She was trained for the throne. There was a document with 3 names in her writing desk, and a succession that had been arranged since before she was born, and a chief minister who could fit 40 years of implication into a single inclination of the head. All of that was real, and none of it had changed. She knew what it was, and she was going to manage it with the same clarity she brought to everything. She was just going to allow herself, for a moment, to lie in the dark and think about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The moon moved. The palace breathed. Somewhere in the military quarter, a lantern was probably still lit. She did not think about that. She closed her eyes and let the spring night do what spring nights do, and eventually, much later than she intended, she slept.